Bonjour à tous, merci beaucoup pour avoir organisé ces 20 ans. C'est avec beaucoup d'émotion que je suis là aujourd'hui. J'ai commencé ma thèse sur le sujet en 2005. Il y a mon directeur de thèse aussi qui est là, il y a ma mère, il y a ma marraine, il y a mon beau-père, donc il y a quand même beaucoup de gens dans la salle. Donc c'est 20 ans de voyage pour moi. Et donc voilà, je voulais remercier pour avoir organisé Mine et Grégoire et Jean-Pierre, enfin beaucoup de monde, Jean-Philippe qui est arrivé, qui a tout fait. Voilà. I'm going to switch to English for those who don't speak French. In 2006, I was a fresh doctoral student. I decided to start a 3-year ethnography study of a trading floor. Some of you might know which one. I was full of hopes and beliefs in the financial market. By 2010, when I finished my PhD, half of the assets under management in my company had disappeared. People had lost their jobs, and one of the most significant financial crises we have ever experienced had just unfolded. What was most distressing to me was not that billions were lost, but that the bond managers I had observed for years during my PhD had been warned that the crisis was unfolding months before countries and companies defaulted. There was a lot of information in the form of environmental, social, and governance criteria. Remember, all those securities at the time issuing information. I was sharing this information with the traders, but they always ignored me. The bond managers I worked for several years never dared to consider non-financial information in the decision processes. I spent 4 years of my doctoral thesis studying why those traders, well-educated traders, and their practice could never change why such a crisis was unfolding. That was the beginning of my journey in sustainable finance. The conclusion of my PhD was simple. Bond managers could not envision the world differently. They had been raised and socialized in a specific way, aware where society was not buying. They believed in models like the yield curves on specific financial models, and ESG has no room for it. I am to understand why financial markets could be transformed or not transformed to serve society, and what society could be doing to those financial markets. Today, 15 years later, I lead the Sustainable Finance Lab at Ivey Business School at Western University. We're between Toronto and Detroit in Ontario. It's a living lab. We developed and test new financial products to support the transition toward a green economy. As I'm doing this exciting work with a wonderful team, I have the unpleasant feeling that the story I experienced 15 years ago during my PhD is repeating itself. Despite the increasing interest in sustainability issues, financial markets still do not seem to grasp how much the biodiversity loss crisis and the climate crisis have already impacted them, and how much the world will be different tomorrow. One number tells it all. Today, 55% of global GDP depends on biodiversity and ecosystem services. However, only 1% of the finance channeled towards climate, only 1% is channeled toward restoring ecosystems, so to biodiversity. In the next 10 minutes, I will try to convince you that you should invest in nature. Let's start with a quick refresher. In 2009, scientists agreed 9 planetary boundaries provided a safe space for humanity, such as climate change, biodiversity loss, or ocean acidification. At the time, so 16 years ago, 3 boundaries had already been breached, so 6 were safe. Last week, the team updated their article. The findings are dire. Only 2 safe thresholds have not been crossed. The biodiversity and climate crisis have already caused havoc on societies and economies alike. Between 1970 and 2016, over 68% of mammals, birds, amphibians, reptiles, and fish on Earth disappeared, and more than 85% of wetlands were lost. The Canadian Climate Institute estimates that climate change would have shaved $25 billion of the national GDP by the end of this year. That represents half a year of Canadian economic growth. The EU is facing losses of similar magnitude. 72% of Eurozone companies and 75% of bank loans in the region are exposed to biodiversity loss. Without urgent action, the EU stands to lose 2% of its GDP by 2050. That rise to 4.66% by 2100. Many countries have developed targets to reverse the crisis. In 2022, the coming Montreal Global Biodiversity Framework was adopted, through which governments committed to protect 30% of land and water by 2030, France included. But global progress is lagging. Only 17.6% of the world's land and 8.6% of the seas are under global protection, and more than 100 nations are less than halfway to meeting the target. I'm using numbers because I know there are financial people in the room, so they need to be convinced. So heavy in numbers. Targets and policy are a good starting point, although insufficient, as you could see the journey. But without capital, so without you, to finance the transition, it is doubtful that we will achieve a green economy. We need you. We need investors. As of 2025, there was an estimated 50 regional and country-level taxonomies, and you've been talking about it, development worldwide, so 50. For those who don't know what the taxonomy is, I'm thinking about my mom, who has the French translation of my discourse as well. Those taxonomies create standardized and science-based definitions to establish climate-compatible investment. In other words, they're here to channel capital towards the green economy. They're here to tell which opportunities they should go in. In Europe, the challenge is immense. To meet the 2030 climate and energy goal, so 2030 is 5 years from now, not even 4 years and a half, the EU will need between 400 and 620 billion in additional funding each year. These figures illustrate not only the scale of what is required, but also the scale of opportunity for you, should you want to grasp biodiversity investments. But the way the transition is approached also presents some challenges. Let me focus on two. First, the next slide, please. First, most projects so far target climate mitigation, or the reduction of carbon emissions. In other words, we try to reduce the harm to the planet. We try to do less, but we need to do differently. And this requires innovation. We will not achieve a 1.5 degree or even a 2 degree scenario without investing in climate adaptation. As I explained above, only 1% of the finance channel towards climate is toward restoring ecosystems, so toward restoring the safe space with our planetary boundaries. We need to shift, so you need to shift, the capital allocation from mitigation to adaptation. Invent new instruments, notably on nature-based solutions, or we might be too late, as we were with the financial crisis. This leads me to the other main challenge we need to address very quickly if we want to transition in time: the need to transform investment practices and build capacity. Today's financial models, and I'm sorry for my finance colleague here, and reporting systems are not aligned with the requirements put forward by those global issues. Investors may be system thinkers. You must integrate science-based targets into your model. You have to work with interdisciplinary teams, conservation biologists, climate scientists. You need to change. The financial tools we developed in the 1960s, the last century, portfolio theory, yield curve, risk diversification, are outdated. They don't include system risk, for instance. We don't have any more diversification as we might think. We need to reinvent how we train and evaluate financiers and their practices. We need to change our finance courses. We need to change our team, the way we teach them. We need to be bold and imagine and activate a new future. And this is where the collaboration between the FIR-PRI, FIR, and us academics, the industry today, like this initiative today, matters. In the Sustainable Finance Lab at Leeds, we are a living laboratory. So we develop financial products with corporations, governments, communities, and industries. We do not study finance from a distance. We build and test instruments in practice. Sometimes we succeed, like the bond you will be introduced this afternoon. But often we fail, and we have to redo and launch new products. A central focus of our work is on nature-based solutions. Nature-based solutions are action that safeguards, manage, and revitalize ecosystems to address societal issues. They're like wildlife corridors, buffer strips, wetlands, natural water retentions. The evidence is clear, and again, a bit more numbers for you to be convinced. A meta-studies of 155 articles published lately shows that nature-based solutions were more effective than engineering solutions in reducing hazard in 65% of cases. They were most cost-effective in 71%. Nature-based solutions could provide 37% of the cost-effective CO2 mitigation needed by 2030, yet they still represent only 1% of the finance towards climate. Today, we estimate that we need $542 billion annually to achieve the target of global nature-based solution by 2030. We are like 200 billion. What we do in the lab, beyond this project, we work on regenerative agriculture. But we don't only work on designing new financial products. We're also trying to revolutionize how research is done, and I think it speaks to both your presentation. We use research like involve communities, indigenous communities, but also people from the cities, people from farmers, like people who are deeply affected by the financial instruments we do. We try to work with those the most effective, and we put them into the design of the financial products. Later today, we're going to be presented the Deshkan-Zibi Conservation Impact Bonds that received the best article. This is a pioneering instrument that is called two-eye seeing. It means it requires one indigenous eye and one Western eye. The goal was to restore ecosystems in the Carolinian region. You have to imagine, it's maybe difficult to imagine in Paris, this bond is sold in the financial markets in Canada, is being audited by a firm. I will not say the word, the name of the firm, but it could be audited. And it had in metrics like nature connectedness. We have indigenous elders who work on this project. In the next slide, this is an indigenous artist from the region. She's been involved in the project, and this is how she describes what two-eye seeing meant to her. And it speaks to the conservation impact bonds. So this is what she wrote. In the drawing, the trees above could represent distinct beings that bring their own gift. They stand separately, yet below the surface, their roots intertwine and reach out to each other. Trees that have strong, deep roots are also often able to give water from deep in the earth to smaller root systems, which help to create a healthy ecosystem. This is also reflected by the flowers and berry bush that are given the deer energy and nutrients. This carries a teaching that while we all come from different walks of life, we are all deeply connected through the land, spirits, and share responsibility to one another. In this project, in this Deshkan-Zibi Conservation Impact Bank, we had climate scientists, conservation biologists, indigenous leaders, sustainable finance leaders, and we all work together building a new type of financial product that will help restore biodiversity and empower indigenous communities. That's the future of sustainable finance. This is working with the community deeply affected. As a word of conclusion, here's what I would like you to take away. I think that as investment professionals, policymakers, citizens, daughters, sisters, mothers, brothers, fathers, each of us can be part of the change. What we do at the Sustainable Finance Lab shows that finance and accounting, which have too often served narrow or destructive purposes, can be reshaped in tools of transformation. This message is especially urgent today. Even as the climate and the biodiversity crisis deepen, we see a rising backlash against responsible investments and an anti-ESG rhetoric. I was just telling the colleagues before that my students worry to take my class in sustainable finance because they're worried that if they have that in their transcripts, they will not be able to find a job in the US. We have lost between 25 and 33% of our students in a sustainability class since the last election in the US presidential. So this is affecting even our classes, even if we're not in the US. This challenge makes it clear that advancing sustainable finance is not just a technical task. It is also political, cultural, and deeply contested. Yet, our experience proves that institutions, if they're questioned and rebuilt with diverse voices, included from a democratic movement, new possibilities emerge. Possibilities that protect ecosystems, strengthens community, and open pathway to more resilient economies. As you could understand, invest in nature, nature-based solutions. Also small and humble, our work demonstrates that academics and practitioners can act differently, engaging directly with those most affected. Today, the world vacillates. And when the world vacillates, where we stand matters, because it can make a difference. So my call for you is that if we act together now, we can still build a safe and just planet for all.